If you're new here, let me know in the comments. It really helps to know that I'm not just talking to myself. And if you've been in a situation like mine, I want to hear about it. Your stories, they matter. They help all of us feel a little less alone in this. For 5 years, I was the ghost in my celebrity chef brother's kitchen. I haunted the prep stations, the walk-in cooler, the quiet corners of the storeroom where the real magic happened. My name is Anya, and while the world knew my brother Dane as the culinary genius behind Dane on Main, I was the architect of his acclaim. Every single award-winning dish, every gushing 5-star review, every breathless piece of press that called him a prodigy was born from the ink-stained pages of my culinary journals. I was the silent partner, the secret ingredient, the soul of a kitchen that wore his face. The relationship was a simple, unspoken contract, written in steam and desperation. He was the face, the brand, the booming voice that charmed television hosts and investors. I was the palate, the hands, the quiet, relentless engine of creativity. He glad-handled in the dining room while I perfected the saffron-infused risotto that critics would later describe as his signature. He posed for magazine covers while I spent 72 hours developing the mole negro that would become the stuff of local legend. It worked, for a while. It worked because I loved him, and because I loved the craft more than the credit. I told myself it wasn't about the applause, it was about the art. A beautiful, tragic lie. The culmination of our 5-year charade was the Michelin star. It wasn't just a star, it was the star. The one that lifts a chef from local hero to global icon. I was the one who engineered it. I'd spent a year deconstructing the very essence of what Michelin looks for: precision, consistency, personality on a plate. I designed a tasting menu that was a narrative, a journey through our shared childhood, filtered through techniques I had spent a decade mastering. It was my heart, served in 12 courses. The night we found out, the kitchen staff, the ones who truly knew who did what, lifted me onto their shoulders in the steamy, chaotic aftermath of service. They chanted my name, just for a moment in the one place my name was ever allowed to be spoken with reverence. Dane wasn't there. He was already on the phone with his publicist. A week later, he was on national television. I watched on a tiny, grease-smeared screen in the prep kitchen, my knuckles white, as I gripped the stainless steel counter. He was radiant, soaking in the praise. The host asked him about his inspiration, about the moment he knew he'd finally made it. Dane smiled his $1,000,000 smile and told a story. He told them about our grandmother, about her rustic, home-style cooking. He painted a picture of himself at her knee, learning her secrets. It was a good story. The only problem was, it was my story. I was the one who spent summers in her garden, my hands stained with dirt and tomato juice. He was the one who was always inside, watching cartoons. Then came the announcement. He spoke of expansion, of new restaurants in new cities, of a Dane on Main empire. Not once did my name cross his lips, not a whisper of a partner, not a hint of a collaborator. I was a ghost, and he was sealing my tomb. The broadcast ended. The staff was quiet, avoiding my eyes. They knew. The silence was thick with pity, and I've always found pity more insulting than rage. I went back to scrubbing down my station, the rhythmic scrape of steel wool against steel, a poor substitute for the scream building in my chest. He found me later that night, as I was packing my knife roll. He was glowing, high on the adrenaline of fame. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just handed me a small rectangular box, wrapped in cheap, glossy paper. I opened it. Inside was a set of store-brand knives, the kind you buy at a discount supermarket for $20. The handles were molded plastic, the blades thin and tinny. They felt like toys. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to seem affectionate but felt like a shove. "Keep practicing," he said, a wide, empty grin on his face. "You're really getting the hang of it." That was the final cut, the deepest one. It wasn't the stolen credit, or the erased identity, or even the lie on national television. It was the breathtaking condescension of that single moment. The gift wasn't a thank you. It was a dismissal. It was a message, clear and cold. You are my subordinate. You are replaceable, and you are nothing without me. He saw me not as his sister, not as an artist, but as a tool that was getting a little too close to thinking it had a name. I looked down at the pathetic knives in my hands, then up at his beaming, triumphant face, and in that moment, the ghost in his kitchen decided to become a poltergeist. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, placed the cheap knives in my bag, and walked out of Dane on Main for the last time. I left behind my journals, my recipes, my entire culinary identity of the last 5 years. He could have them, because I was taking something far more valuable with me. I was taking our grandmother's secret recipe book, the one he never even knew existed. The bistro I opened is directly across the street. It's small, and the sign just says Anya's. Now critics are calling my food a revelation, and the only reservations Dane gets are the ones he has about filing for bankruptcy. People say my success is the best revenge, but they're wrong. It was never about revenge, it was about resurrection. The walk home from the restaurant that night was a blur. The city lights smeared through the tears I refused to let fall. My apartment, usually a sanctuary, felt like a cage. It was small, on the 4th floor of a walk-up, with a view of a brick wall. It was the kind of place you live in when you're paying your dues, when you're investing everything you have, emotionally and financially, into someone else's dream. The glamour of Dane on Main ended at the staff entrance. For me, there was no chauffeured car, no penthouse suite. There was just this box of an apartment, filled with second-hand furniture, and the lingering smell of onions from my experiments for his menu. I placed the box of cheap knives on my small kitchen counter. The cheerful, garish packaging seemed to mock the quiet desperation in the room. Master Chef, Pro Series 7-piece set. The box screamed in a Comic Sans-adjacent font. It was an insult wrapped in an insult. I sank onto a wobbly stool, the one I'd found on the curb and repainted myself, and just stared at it. The silence in the apartment was deafening, a stark contrast to the clatter and roar of the professional kitchen that had been my world. The silence allowed the thoughts I'd been suppressing for 5 years to finally surface. 5 years. It felt like a lifetime. I remembered the day Dane had first pitched me the idea. He wasn't a celebrity then. He was just my charismatic, slightly too ambitious older brother with a failed food truck and a mountain of debt. He found me in the kitchen of the quiet, respectable hotel where I was a sous chef, steadily and invisibly working my way up the ladder. He'd been charming, desperate, and utterly convincing. Just for a year, Anya, he had pleaded, his eyes wide with that practiced sincerity I'd seen him use 1,000 times. Just help me get it off the ground. We'll be partners, 50-50. Your food, my face. Together, we'll be unstoppable. I, the ever-loyal sister, the one who had always cleaned up his messes since we were kids, had agreed. I believed in his dream because, in truth, it was a version of my own. I was a creator, not a performer. The idea of hiding in the kitchen while he handled the spotlight didn't seem like a sacrifice. It felt like a perfect arrangement. I could focus purely on the art, unburdened by the pressures of fame. What a fool I was. I hadn't realized that in his world, the art didn't matter without the fame. The person in the kitchen was just labor. The person in the spotlight was the genius. The first year bled into the second. The restaurant took off faster than either of us had imagined. The first rave review came from a notoriously prickly local food critic. It was for a dish I'd spent a month perfecting, a seared scallop with a celery root puree and a brown butter vinaigrette, finished with a dusting of dehydrated coral mushroom. It was a technical, delicate, and deeply personal dish. I remembered the exact moment of its creation. It was 3 a.m. The kitchen was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerators. I had been thinking about a day we'd spent at the beach as kids, the salty air, the earthy smell of the dunes. I'd translated that memory into flavor. A week later, I saw Dane on a local morning show. The host asked him about the now famous scallop dish. Where did the inspiration come from? Dane leaned back, looking thoughtful and profound. He started talking about a day at the beach, the salty air, the earthy smell of the dunes. He wasn't just taking credit for the dish, he was stealing my memory. He was narrating my life as his own. I watched, my stomach twisting into a cold, hard knot. That was the first time I almost quit. I confronted him that night, my voice shaking with a rage I rarely allowed myself to feel. He was masterful. He turned it around, making me feel small and petty. Anya, it's just a story for the cameras, he'd said, his arm around my shoulder. It's part of the brand. We're a team. Are you trying to break up the team? He made my demand for recognition sound like a betrayal. He was so good at it. So I stayed. I swallowed the bitterness and went back to work. I told myself it was for the good of the restaurant, for the team. The memories kept coming, each one another layer of proof of my own willful blindness. I thought about our grandmother, Nana Elena. She was the true heart of our family's culinary tradition. She wasn't a chef, she was a cook, and there's a world of difference. Her kitchen was a place of alchemy, a warm, fragrant haven where she turned simple ingredients into manifestations of love. Dane remembered her food. I remembered her hands. I remembered the way she'd show me how to properly knead dough, not with force, but with patience. She'd say, "You have to listen to it, Anya. It will tell you what it needs." Dane ate the bread. I learned its language. Nana had 2 grandchildren, but she knew who had her heart. Dane was loud and charming, the one who would steal a cookie and flash a grin that made it impossible to be mad. I was the quiet one, the observer, the one who would sit for hours, just watching her, absorbing everything. He saw her kitchen as a place to get fed. I saw it as a place to learn. Before she passed away, she had given me a gift. It wasn't a secret shared with both of us. It was a legacy entrusted to one. My gaze drifted from the cheap knives to a heavy, dark wood chest tucked away in the corner of my living room. It was her chest. I'd had it for years, a piece of her I couldn't bear to part with, but also, in some ways, was afraid to open. The key was small and ornate, and I kept it in a little dish by my bed. My entire body felt heavy, weighted down by 5 years of accumulated resentment. I walked over to the chest, my movements slow, almost ritualistic. I unlocked it. The hinges creaked, and the air filled with the scent of cedar, dried lavender, and old paper. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded silk, was a book. It was a thick, leather-bound ledger, the kind you can't buy anymore. The leather was worn smooth in places, scarred in others. There was no title on the cover. I lifted it out. It was heavy, dense with history. I opened it to the first page. It was filled with Nana Elena's elegant, looping cursive. This wasn't a recipe book, not in the modern sense. There were no precise measurements, no neat lists of ingredients. It was a journal. It was a philosophy. The first entry was dated from the year she arrived in this country. She wrote about the loneliness, the strangeness of a new place, and how she found her way back to herself by planting a small pot of basil on her windowsill. The basil, she wrote, reminded her that roots can grow in any soil, as long as you give them sun and water. The book was filled with entries like this. Each recipe was woven into a story about an emotion, a season, a memory. For a friend who has lost their way, one entry began, "You must make a broth. It must be clear, like a perfect truth. The bones must simmer for 2 days, releasing their strength. You do not add salt until the very end, because sorrow is already salty enough." Another entry, titled "The Persimmon of Patience," detailed how to select the bitterest, most unpromising fruit and have the faith to let it sit on a cool, dark shelf until its flesh turned sweet and yielding. She wrote that some things, and some people, cannot be rushed into ripeness. You must give them time to become what they are meant to be. I ran my fingers over the pages, over the ink she had pressed into the paper with her own hand. This was my inheritance, not the fame, not the brand, not the restaurant with the glowing sign. This was it. This book was the source code. Dane had told a story about her on television, but he didn't know the first thing about her. He knew her as a character. I knew her as a philosopher. I closed the book and held it to my chest. The cold resolve that had been slowly crystallizing inside me now became diamond hard. The cheap knives on the counter were a symbol of what he thought of me. This book was a symbol of who I actually was. He had built an empire on a hollowed-out, commercialized version of my talent. I would build my own world from the soul he never knew we had. The despair that had suffocated me just an hour before was gone, burned away by a clean, white-hot clarity. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that, and I think I almost believed it. It wasn't about destroying what he had built. It was about building something that he could never touch, something so fundamentally authentic that it would expose his entire enterprise as the fragile, soulless imitation it was. I looked at the box of knives one last time. "Keep practicing," he'd said. Oh, I would. I was about to give a masterclass. The plan began to form not as a grand, strategic blueprint, but as a series of quiet, necessary steps, each one flowing logically from the last. The first step was understanding my arsenal. I spent the next 2 days doing nothing but reading Nana Elena's book. I didn't just read it. I absorbed it. It was like a conversation with her across time. Her voice was on every page, calm, wise, and fiercely practical. The book was divided by seasons, but also by emotions. There were chapters on dishes for mending a quarrel, feasts for welcoming a stranger, and most poignantly, food to eat alone, for strength. This book was my hidden leverage. Dane's cooking, which was really my cooking for the past 5 years, was based on modern French technique. It was precise, flashy, and impressive. It was designed to wow critics. Nana's cooking was different. It was rooted in a much older, more elemental Italian tradition. It was about coaxing the soul out of an ingredient, not imposing your will upon it. The techniques were subtle, often requiring immense patience. She wrote about things Dane would have scoffed at, like how the phase of the moon affected the rise of her dough, or how the taste of a tomato changed depending on whether it was picked in the morning or the afternoon. To a modernist chef like my brother, this would be peasant superstition. To me, it was a roadmap to a kind of authenticity he couldn't even comprehend, let alone replicate. More than just philosophy, the book contained practical secrets. It listed her suppliers, not companies, but families. The Santini family, who had been making olive oil on the same plot of land for 200 years. The Rosses, who kept a rare breed of pig that foraged in chestnut forests. And a man named Matteo, a farmer whose name appeared again and again. Nana described him as a poet of the soil. She wrote that he didn't just grow vegetables, he listened to them. According to her notes, his farm was only an hour outside the city. This was my first move. I found the number for Matteo's earthly goods online. A gruff, older voice answered on the third ring. I introduced myself as Anya, Elena's granddaughter. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then the voice softened. "Elena's girl," he said. "I remember you. You were the quiet one with the serious eyes. You always asked about the dirt." I drove out to his farm the next day. It was a world away from the city's concrete and steel. The air was clean and smelled of damp earth and growing things. Matteo was exactly as I'd pictured him, weathered, with hands like knotted roots, and eyes that had seen more sunrises than I'd had hot meals. He showed me around his farm. It wasn't a massive industrial operation. It was a patchwork of carefully tended plots, teeming with varieties of vegetables I'd only ever seen in botanical drawings. He handed me a small, deep purple carrot, and I ate it right there, dirt and all. The flavor was explosive, sweet, earthy, with a hint of spice. It was more carrot than any carrot I had ever tasted. We sat on his porch, drinking cool water from mason jars. I told him my story. I didn't have to embellish. I told him about the 5 years, the stolen credit, the Michelin star, the cheap knives. He listened patiently, nodding, his gaze fixed on the horizon. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he told me a story of his own. About a year ago, a fancy chef from the city had come to his farm. The chef had walked around, pointing at things, demanding prices, trying to haggle him down. He'd treated Mateo's life's work like a commodity, a line item on a spreadsheet. The chef's name was Dane. Mateo had politely told him to get off his land. A small, knowing smile touched his lips. Your grandmother, she understood, he said. She knew that the food is only as good as the heart of the person who grows it, and the person who cooks it. He looked me straight in the eye. Whatever you need, he said, it's yours. Exclusively. Dane, with all his money and fame, couldn't buy a single leaf of lettuce from this farm. I, with my shattered career and empty bank account, had just secured a supply chain to the best ingredients in the state. My first ally. The second step was legal. I knew Dane's corporation had lawyers. I had my savings, a meager amount I'd squirreled away over the years, ironically from the salary he paid me to create his success. I found a small law firm that specialized in small businesses. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Maria, listened to my story without judgment. I was terrified he could sue me, that there was some implicit non-compete clause in the ether. Maria laughed, not a mean laugh, but a reassuring one. She asked, "Did you ever sign a contract, an employment agreement, a non-disclosure agreement?" I shook my head. He was my brother. It was all a handshake deal. Her smile widened. Anya, his arrogance is your greatest asset. He never saw you as a threat, so he never took the most basic steps to protect himself. You have no legal obligation to him. The recipes you developed while under his employ might be a gray area, but you're not planning on using those, are you? No, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. I have my own. Good, she replied. Then he doesn't have a leg to stand on. She charged me a fraction of what a corporate lawyer would have, and I left her office feeling 10 feet tall. My second ally. The third step was the most audacious: location. I knew I couldn't compete with Dane on scale. Dane on Maine was a palace of glass and steel, a 150-seat monument to his ego. I needed something different. I needed something intimate, something that felt like Nana's kitchen, and I needed it to be a statement. I was walking down the main street one evening, my mind racing when I saw it. Directly across from the glowing, ostentatious sign of Dane on Maine, there was a defunct diner. It had been closed for years. The windows were dusty, the sign faded. A for lease sign was taped to the inside of the door. It was small, maybe 40 seats at most. It was perfect. It was a declaration of war, silent and elegant. Every single person who went to his restaurant would have to see mine. Every critic, every customer, every supplier. I would not be a ghost in the shadows anymore. I would be right there, across the street, in the light. Getting the lease was the hardest part. My savings were barely enough for the security deposit. I spent a week writing a business plan. It wasn't filled with financial projections and marketing jargon. It was filled with the philosophy from Nana's book. I wrote about farm-to-table sourcing, about a menu that changed weekly based on what Mateo could provide. I wrote about creating not just a restaurant but a community. I took it to a small local credit union. The loan officer was an older woman named Carol, who reminded me a little of Nana. She read my plan, her expression unreadable. She looked at my financials and frowned. "This is a big risk, Anya," she said. "Your brother's restaurant is a giant. How can you possibly compete?" I looked her in the eye. "I'm not competing with his restaurant," I said. "There's nothing there to compete with. It's a brand, not a soul. I'm building a soul." I told her about Mateo. I told her about my grandmother. I told her about the food I wanted to cook. I didn't know if it was working, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Understanding. She approved the loan. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough for the lease, for a fresh coat of paint, and for a set of good, solid, second-hand kitchen equipment. Enough to begin. My third ally. I signed the lease, the key cold in my hand. That night, I stood in the dusty, empty space. The smell of old grease and neglect filled the air. Across the street, Dane on Maine was glittering, alive with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. I could see the silhouette of my brother moving through the dining room, a king in his castle. I felt a surge of something so powerful. It almost knocked me off my feet. It was a cocktail of fear, rage, and pure, unadulterated resolve. He had made me invisible. Now every single day he would be forced to see me. The ghost was about to build a house right in his front yard. The first 6 weeks were a blur of controlled chaos. I didn't hire a fancy design firm or a high-priced contractor. I did most of the work myself, with the help of a few day laborers I paid in cash. I tore out the old, cracked linoleum and discovered beautiful original hardwood floors underneath, which I sanded and refinished by hand. I painted the walls a warm, creamy white. The space was small, and I embraced it. I wanted it to feel like you were walking into a real home, not a commercial establishment. The name on the simple hand-painted sign out front read, simply, Anya's, my name, my space. Dane found out about it within a week. His general manager, a slick man in a suit that was too tight, came over. He stood in the doorway, sawdust on his expensive shoes, and looked around with a smirk. "A little diner," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Henshin. That's cute, Anya. Is this a hobby?" I didn't stop painting. I'd utter pain. I just looked over my shoulder and smiled. "Something like that," I said. He tried to intimidate me, talking vaguely about market saturation and brand integrity. I just kept painting. He left, clearly flustered by my lack of reaction. I knew what Dane was doing. He was sending a message. He still saw me as a child, playing make-believe. He couldn't conceive of me as a genuine competitor. That arrogance was the best gift he could have given me. My first real move, the first shot fired in our silent war, wasn't a grand opening. It was an email. I compiled a small, carefully curated list of people, a dozen of the city's most passionate and discerning food bloggers, the ones who wrote long, thoughtful essays, not just Instagram posts. I also invited a handful of local artisans and small business owners I respected, and of course, Mateo, Maria, and Carol. The email was simple. It said, "I'm cooking again. I'd be honored if you would be my first guests." I attached a sample menu, with no descriptions, just a list of ingredients. Mateo's afternoon tomatoes, bronze die-cut pasta, lamb that knew the mountain wind. I was speaking a different language, the language of the book. The night of the soft opening, I was terrified. The 40-seat restaurant was full. There was a low, happy buzz in the air. I wasn't in the dining room. I was where I belonged, in the kitchen. It was a tiny kitchen, a fraction of the size of the one across the street, but it was all mine. Every pot, every pan, I had bought and seasoned myself. I had one prep cook and a dishwasher, and that was it. The first plates went out, a simple bruschetta, but with Mateo's tomatoes, which I'd barely touched, just a drizzle of the Santini family's olive oil, and a single basil leaf. The silence that fell over a table when they took the first bite was the only review I needed. I cooked from the heart, guided by Nana's words. I made a risotto, not with flashy saffron, but with a deep, earthy mushroom broth that took 2 days to prepare, just as the book instructed. I served a simple roasted chicken that I had brined in buttermilk and herbs for 24 hours. It was honest food. It was my food. 2 days later, the first blog post appeared. It was from a writer known as the Cynical Palate, a man notorious for eviscerating restaurants with lazy prose and even lazier food. I held my breath as I read it. He started by describing the soulless corporate theatrics that had come to dominate the city's dining scene, a thinly veiled shot at Dane. Then he wrote about my restaurant. He didn't call it a restaurant. He called it a revelation. He wrote, "Anya's is not a restaurant. It is a reminder that food can be more than fuel, more than entertainment. It can be a story. It can be a memory." After one bite of a tomato that tasted more of itself than any I have had since my childhood, I realized I was not in a diner across the street from a celebrity. I was in the kitchen of a master. He ended the review with a line that made my heart stop. "There is an old-world soul in this cooking, a depth that feels inherited. It is the kind of authenticity that cannot be faked, bought, or branded. You either have it, or you are the guy across the street. The post went viral in the local food community. My phone started ringing. It didn't stop. Dane's panic wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow-building pressure system. At first he ignored me. He told his staff I was a flash in the pan, a novelty that would wear off. But then the articles started to multiply. My little bistro was getting national press. A travel magazine called Anya's the best reason to visit the city. The narrative was irresistible. The humble, authentic sister, emerging from the shadow of her flashy corporate brother. He started to see the effects in his own reservation book. Tables at Dane on Main, once booked a month in advance, were now available on a Friday night. His regulars, the wealthy and influential patrons who chased the thrill of the new, were now being photographed, leaving my restaurant, their faces beaming. The power was shifting. It wasn't something I was actively doing. It was a natural consequence of the truth. I had the better product. The first real crack in his empire came from inside his own kitchen. His sous chef, a talented and hardworking man named Marco, whom I had trained, came to see me one night after my service. He looked tired. He told me the atmosphere at Dane on Main had become toxic. Dane was paranoid, angry, blaming the staff for the downturn. Marco said he couldn't stand it anymore. He couldn't stand cooking food he didn't believe in, for a chef he no longer respected. He asked if I had a place for him. I hired him on the spot. The news that Dane's right-hand man had defected to the diner across the street was a seismic event in the local restaurant world. It was a vote of no confidence from the inside. Dane's brand was built on the perception of him as a charismatic leader, a chef's chef. Now his own people were abandoning him. His desperation curdled into a series of clumsy, ill-conceived counterattacks. He went on a local radio show and dismissed my cooking as quaint, simple, and uninspired. He said, "My sister is a decent home cook, but she doesn't understand fine dining." The comments backfired spectacularly. The host played a clip of my latest review from a national paper, which called my food profound in its elegant simplicity. Dane was left sputtering, looking petty and insecure. Then came the ultimate act of hubris. He tried to copy me. He put a new dish on his menu, a rustic mushroom risotto. I knew immediately what he was doing. He was trying to replicate the dish that everyone was raving about at my place. But he didn't have the book. He didn't have Nana's wisdom. He didn't know that the secret wasn't in the mushrooms. It was in the 2-day broth, in the patience, in the philosophy. A food blogger I knew went to try it. Her review was brutal. She posted side-by-side photos. My risotto, deep, creamy and dark with flavor, and his, a pale, watery imitation. She wrote, "Dane on Main has finally revealed its true colors. It is a cover band, and a bad one at that. They are playing someone else's music, and they don't even know the words." The humiliation was public and complete. He had tried to fight me on my own turf, the turf of authenticity, and had been exposed as a fraud. The silent takeover was nearly complete. I hadn't poached his staff. I hadn't stolen his customers. I hadn't run a negative PR campaign. I had simply cooked. I had told the truth on a plate, night after night. And the truth, it turned out, was a far more powerful weapon than fame or money. The foundation of his empire, which I had secretly built, was crumbling under the weight of its own emptiness. All I had to do was stand across the street and be myself. The exodus began as a trickle and became a flood. It wasn't just customers, it was suppliers. The fishmonger he had used for years, tired of Dane's increasingly frantic demands and late payments, called me and offered me his best product. The same happened with the cheesemonger and the baker. They were all small business owners, and they recognized something in me that they had never seen in my brother: respect. I was building a community, an ecosystem of quality and mutual trust. He was running a transactional business, and his transactions were failing. His desperation peaked about a month after Marco started working for me. One of his investors, a powerful venture capitalist who had bankrolled the failed expansion plan, booked a table at my restaurant. I didn't know who he was until after the meal. He asked to speak with me. He was a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his 60s. He told me his dinner was the best he'd had in a decade. Then he looked at me with a calculating gaze. "The numbers at the restaurant across the street are not good, Anya," he said. "We both know why. Dane is a great showman, but it appears the show is over." He then made a staggering offer. He offered to buy out my brother's shares and install me as the head of the entire restaurant group, with full creative control. It was the ultimate validation. The very power structure that had propped up Dane was now trying to recruit me. 5 years of silent work, 5 years of being the ghost, had culminated in this moment, the keys to the kingdom being offered to me on a silver platter. I thought about it for a full minute. I pictured myself in that massive, soulless kitchen, at the head of that glass and steel empire, and I felt nothing. No excitement, no triumph, just a profound sense of weariness. I had already built my own kingdom. It was small, and it was made of wood and warm light, not steel and glass, but it was mine. I politely declined his offer. I told him I was happy where I was. He looked surprised, but also impressed. He nodded, shook my hand, and left. The power shift was complete. I didn't need to take over his world. I had made his world irrelevant. A week later, Dane appeared at my back door after we had closed for the night. I was wiping down the last of the counters with Marco. Dane didn't look like a celebrity chef. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His hair was a mess. His expensive suit was rumpled. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. He didn't bluster or threaten. He pleaded. "Anya, we need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. He tried to push past me into the kitchen. My kitchen. I stood my ground. I just looked at him. What he saw in my eyes must have stopped him because he just sagged against the door frame. "I don't know what you're doing," he stammered, "but you have to stop. You're destroying me. My investors are pulling out. The bank is calling my loans. This little place is killing me." He gestured around my small, humble kitchen, as if it were some sort of black magic temple. I remained silent. He took a different tack. He tried to appeal to the person I used to be. "Come back," he said. "I'll make you a full partner. No executive chef. Your name on the menu right next to mine. A huge salary. Anything you want. We can fix this. We're a team, remember? We're family. Family." The word hung in the air between us, sour and ugly. I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, dangerously calm. "You had 5 years to treat me like family, Dane. You had 5 years to see me as a partner. You had 5 years to put my name next to yours." He flinched as if I'd struck him. I reached under the prep counter and pulled something out. It was one of the cheap, store-brand knives he had given me. The plastic handle was scuffed, the blade dull. I used it to open cardboard boxes of produce now. It was the only thing it was good for. I held it up. The dim light from the alley glinted off the cheap steel. "You told me to keep practicing," I said, my voice as flat and cold as the blade. "I did. I didn't need to say another word." The look on his face was a portrait of utter defeat. Every ounce of his manufactured confidence, his bravado, his charm, just evaporated. He saw it all in that moment. His cruelty, his arrogance, his catastrophic miscalculation. He had mistaken my silence for weakness, my loyalty for subservience. He had never seen me at all. I turned my back on him and went back to cleaning my counter. Marco, who had witnessed the whole exchange in silence, simply handed me a clean cloth. After a few seconds, I heard the sound of Dane's footsteps retreating down the alley. It was over. 2 weeks later, the news broke. Dane on Main was closing its doors permanently, citing insurmountable financial difficulties. The empire was officially dead. The same day, I got a phone call. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, with a distinct French accent. He introduced himself as an inspector for the Michelin Guide. He informed me that they had been dining at my restaurant, unannounced, for the past 2 months. He said my cooking was, in his words, a work of profound integrity. He didn't say anything more, but the implication was clear. I was about to get my star, my own star, earned in my own kitchen, under my own name. It was never about revenge, it was about justice, and justice, like a perfectly prepared meal, is a dish best served on your own terms. My new reality is a quiet, steady rhythm. It's the sound of Marco laughing with the prep cooks in the morning. It's the sight of Matteo walking through the back door with a crate of perfect, sun-warmed figs, his face beaming with pride. It's the low, happy hum of a full dining room, of people connecting not just with my food, but with each other. We built more than a restaurant. We built a sanctuary, a place where work has dignity and art has soul. I am not a ghost anymore. My name is on the lease, on the bank loan, on the sign above the door. It's a strange feeling to be seen after spending so long being invisible. It's like learning to breathe without a weight on your chest. As a final act of reclamation, I took the first page from Nana Elena's book, the page where she wrote about planting basil on her windowsill, about how roots can grow in any soil. I had it professionally framed, not in an ornate gilded frame, but in a simple, beautiful frame, made from reclaimed barn wood. It hangs in the entryway of my restaurant, right where everyone can see it. It's the first thing you see when you walk in, and the last thing you see when you leave. It's our constitution. So yes, for 5 years I was the ghost in my brother's kitchen. I let his ambition eclipse my talent. I let his voice drown out my own. I accepted the lie that my contribution was secondary to his performance. And I just know, that there are so many of you out there who feel the same way. You might not be in a kitchen. You might be in a boardroom, a cubicle, a studio, a classroom. You might be the one writing the code while someone else takes the credit for the app. You might be the one designing the strategy while your boss presents it as their own. You might be the one holding a family, a project, or a whole company together, all from the shadows. This story isn't just about food. It's for anyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or erased. It's for every person who has poured their heart and soul into something, only to watch someone else sign their name to it. Here's the moral, the lesson I learned in the fire. They can't steal your talent. They can't patent your spirit. They can't erase your worth. They can only obscure it for a little while. The foundations you build in the dark, the skills you hone in silence, are the ones that are real. They are the ones that can withstand any storm. Your value is not, and never will be, determined by their recognition. It is determined by you, by your integrity, by your hands, by what you create when no one is watching. Don't wait for them to give you a seat at their table. Go build your own. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt that sting of being made to feel invisible, please let me know in the comments below. Reading your stories, knowing I'm not alone in this, it means the world. It helps to know I'm not just screaming into the void. So please, like this video. If it moved you, share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. And be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more stories about reclaiming what is yours. Thank you for listening.